None of the content on this or any episode of the Kratom Science Podcast, Kratom Science Journal Club, or on any page of kratomscience.com is intended, nor should it be considered, medical claims or medical advice. This is the Kratom Science Journal Club with Dr. Jonathan Cachat, neuroscientist and expert in psychopharmacology. In each episode, we discuss an article in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm your host, Brian Gallagher, blog and social media writer for KratomScience.com, your source for all things Kratom. Correlations of Kratom use, behavior, and psychiatric conditions.
Yeah,
there's 4 past Kratom Science podcast guests, Oliver Grundmann, Kirsten Smith, Darshan Singh, Zach Walsh, Marc Swogger, actually 5. And
you're running out of people to talk to, bro.
Yeah, I got to get some of these other people on here and see if they'll come on. Some of them are saying, like a couple I've asked, not on this paper, and they've been saying, well, I'm not going to say anything different than the other scientist said that was on your podcast. I'm like, oh, man.
Yeah, sounds like an excuse for someone who is some sort of like shy. Like it sounds like an excuse from an introverted academic.
Yeah. I've been getting a lot of non-responses and stuff, but that's fine. The only thing I don't like is when somebody is all enthusiastic about coming on and then I get ghosted. Anyway, this paper here. So this was like a big survey. I thought it was the one that we helped to promote with the app and everything, but it's not. That only they only collected data from that last year. But this is the data was collected between July 2019 and July 2020, and it was completed by 4,945 people who use Kratom, but this paper is looking at 2,296 respondents that completed an extended survey that included clinical scales for measuring ADHD, PTSD, depression, and anxiety disorders. So they're looking at people who use Kratom that qualify for those conditions based on the survey. The demographics, they did a bunch of demographics. Majority 31 to 50 years old, employed, college educated, white, most of them were male. Concurrent or prior use of Kratom with cannabis, CBD, and benzodiazepines.
Well, they started off by introducing a new term that I don't know how we properly say it, but a pook?
People who use
Kratom. Who uses Kratom?
Yeah, people who use Kratom. Because I know they do, like, it's just shorthand for these papers, but I know they do people who use drugs. And I think
I haven't heard of that one either.
Yeah, I've heard of that one because Pasquale Tanguay used it in his papers, but I think it's mainly one of those things where they want to say people rather than drug addicts or drug abusers, and because it's kind of like a humanizes people who use
trigger words,
drugs.
Just call someone plus. It's kind of like you see on all the drug forums, swim over and over again.
What's that?
Someone I met. So like you're talking about an experience on an illegal drug, and you don't want to say it was you or someone you know.
Oh, okay.
It's someone you met. So it's swim said this.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. I'll use that one. I got to write that down. Because I'm usually like, yeah, my cousin. And it actually is my cousin. I have a lot of cousins, though, so it's, puts them in a large pool of people. Yeah, 2019 to 2020. So the subsequent one that I thought that we help promote is beyond a survey. This is just a survey, but the one that Kirsten Smith is working on through NIDA is like a real world clinical assessment where the people started out with a survey, then they used an app and everything, but this one we're talking about here is just a survey.
I would be surprised, that one that they did it through with NIDA, an ongoing survey, and that they are continuing to collect data, but also usually it takes quite a while for them to complete the analysis on that. I'd be surprised if that was already those results were published yet.
Yeah, so this is from they completed it in 2020, so this is like 2.5 years ago where they collected this data. And I think they even mentioned the pandemic, which might have affected the habits for co-use of other drugs. I think they mentioned that. Although the survey was launched prior to the COVID-19 pandemic and concluded during the pandemic, we did not suspect the kratom availability was affected. Yeah, well, that's true. Because it says most of the people ordered it online. So I'm just looking at all the survey results here.
I thought the age range was interesting there, that like most of them, we're looking at the majority being the 30 to 50 crowd, right? It's not, which I think lends support to the notion that these people are using it in some sort of self-medication way rather than like teenagers just trying to, take anything that'll change how they feel.
Yeah, there was only about like a little over 12% were 18 to 30. And like the rest were 31 and 61 and older, 31 to 90, I guess. But
and that would also, exclude the often studied college age people, men or women, right? So if you're 30, presumably you're not an undergrad at taking Psych 101.
That's who usually takes these kinds of surveys, I guess, because of their proximity to the universities.
Yeah, generally, they say there's all these studies on like human cognition and human behavior, but like really, we know a lot about college age kids taking Psych 101 rather than like broadly the human population. Back in like the 60s, or back in the day, it was much worse. And, usually at that point too, most of the people writing and doing the scientific research were men. Yeah. But so I think at least it's better now that people are more aware of those sort of internal biases. But yeah, this is not just those college age students.
Yeah, especially with substance use, because the reason you're using, we've talked about this before, but young people like to party and older people like to not hurt and feel, relax kind of thing. Notice the gender, so I don't know how they got it's probably explained somewhere and I missed it, but it's female 41.12%, male 50.91%. So where's the other 9%? It's only 0.25% that identifies transgender. Where'd the other 9% of people go? I guess
interesting question.
Because they said it was like mostly male, which is a factor in biologically male, which is a factor in how much they take and how it's metabolized. Maybe they just didn't answer.
They just didn't fill it out. Yeah, they were like, I'm not either of these three, and then left it blank, I guess.
They didn't have enough options, maybe.
Doing some quick math. So the total number of respondents for the whole survey was how many?
So the total number was like over 5,000. No, there were 7,381 responses. They only used respondents that completed at least 80% of the survey, including demographics. So that was 5,152. So they used 70% of all of them that completed the survey. And then of the valid responses, they only used 2,296 for this particular paper that qualified for a psychiatric condition.
Gotcha, yeah. Because if you add up the age frequencies, you get the 2,296. If you add up the sex frequencies, though, you get 2,275. So yeah, there's about like 20 folks missing.
Okay, so that might make sense for why that's missing. And they focus on anxiety, depression, ADHD, and PTSD, but they also, people also listed back pain, chronic pain, fibromyalgia, rheumatoid arthritis, substance use disorder. Only 191 people listed that. There's some bipolar personality disorders, very small percentage. Most people found out about it on the internet and from friends and family.
These were all in the U.S., right?
Most were in the U.S. and Canada. They said 96% were from U.S. and Canada, but then there was like 4% overseas. I think because the universities that the authors are from, there's some in the UK, there's one in Malaysia, and there's one in British Columbia and then the United States. So okay. maybe there's some people from the UK that answered, but they said you should probably consider this like a North American study. They said that at one point in the paper. Majority, 83%, get it online, and then the next highest is 18.7% get it from shops. Smart shop or other shop. I'm not sure what a smart shop is, but
a head shop. Usually they're called smart shops. I know, like in Amsterdam, a smart shop is a place where you go to get, like, I don't want to say psychedelics, but generally, yeah, psychedelics. But it's like supplements that are legal, but generally they may have something else behind the counter. But drugs that are supposed to mess with your mental state.
How long have you been affected by a medical condition prior to taking Kratom? The majority, 66%, answered more than 5 years. Only 2% answered less than a year. So these are for long-term conditions that they're taking Kratom for. And how long has it been since you first consumed Kratom? Only 8% said less than 6 months. The majority is 2 to 5 years. And the second highest is 1 to 2 years, then more than 5. So these are, in general, long-term Kratom consumers that are answering the questions.
Which is also acknowledged, it's a positive bias selection factor. Like, generally, people don't want to talk about their drug use, especially if it's a bad experience. But, like, those that are willing to just have a bias that they've been using for a while, it's been effective for them for some reason. So at least the authors acknowledge this selection bias.
Yeah, they do acknowledge the bias towards the end there. They mention if people have a bad experience, they're unlikely to take part in a Kratom survey or be in the online spaces where they actually recruited people. And they did I think they used the American Kratom Association, but they acknowledge the bias. On the other hand, these are long-term Kratom consumers, so a lot of the criticism is, well, yeah, it's great for the first year, and then I went crazy on it, but this is focusing on people with these psychiatric conditions that have been using Kratom long-term. And they don't necessarily say it's all good. They say their substance co-use seems to be a little higher, and they say that in some cases, it may be exacerbating adverse effects of substance co-use, higher substance co-use among Kratom users with psychiatric conditions. And in the conclusion, they say, although Kratom was reported as improving depressive and anxiety symptoms in those with a psychiatric condition, indicating some perceived therapeutic benefit, its concomitant use with prescription psychiatric medications may produce or exacerbate adverse effects. So they were talking about specifically with psychiatric medications and drug interactions. So the idea is there that it has to be looked at, and their psychiatrist or doctor should know about it. That's what Grundmann said when I had him on the podcast. So he's really about pushing for people to work with their doctor if they use Kratom. Not a lot of people like to do that because they feel like they're going to be put on a list, and if they break their leg, they're not going to get opiates because they Kratom, or they'll give them Kratom use disorder or something like that because they've had experiences like that in the past with not being able to get opioids.
Right.
Another thing I pointed out in the paper is the dosage is the majority is 1 to 3 grams, but that's like 33%. 31% said 3 to 5 grams, and this is per dose. And then the majority said they take that dose 3 times a day. That's 29%. So for a lot of people, it seems like it's above the 10 grams a day mark. It's not for most. For most, it would be about 3 to 9 grams a day, I guess, because it's 1 to 3 grams is the majority. But a lot of people are taking above 10 grams per day. It should be important, especially if you're taking that much, to ask the vendor for lab results, because when I had Walt Progelik on, he did the test about lead and kratom products where he found a bunch of lead that would be toxic if somebody was taking above 10 grams per day. So that's why people, especially if people were taking that much, they should ask their vendor for recent labs to at least make sure it's not contaminated. If you can't get the alkaloid levels, at least make sure what you're taking is clean. So it seems like there's a lot of people taking that amount as far as this survey goes.
Well, I would say that generally corresponds to like what doses are reported on like, Reddit or some other forums. Like it's not like it's nowhere near the amounts people are reporting, like way less, but it's also not way more. Like it generally seems to fit within the range of expectations, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people on Reddit. They're like, "Oh, I take 40 grams a day and I'm fine."
Yeah,
I'm like, "Yeah,
haven't pooped in 2 years."
Yeah, that's a little much. Just like literally every single person that you've read in case reports that have a problem with, and they're only taking kratom, are taking high amounts. I don't think there's anybody that takes a 1 teaspoon a day that ends up in the ER just because of kratom. And how do you usually have used kratom? A majority either take a powder, capsule, or with a beverage. So 50% powdered kratom's consumed with beverage, 33% powdered kratom pure or in pill, tablet, capsule form. Only 12.6% are using a tea. Some people do it with food, and then there's only 0.7% that do the liquid shots, which is good because I think those are where a lot of people get in trouble. 0 people reported smoking it. So if you're a journalist listening to this and you're about to write a story, you can leave out the "it can be smoked" part.
Yeah, right. That's fear-mongering.
Yeah, it's not even one person. Did you increase your regular dose of kratom over time? 2/3 said no, they did not, and 1/3 said yes. And 10 did not wish to answer, and we could probably assume they're yeses as well. You'd say about 1/3 said they increased their regular dose of kratom, and 2/3 didn't, so, which doesn't necessarily mean they're addicted. They might have started small and worked their way to a dose that they're happy with, and, or they might have a dependency or whatever. Change in severity of medical conditions since starting kratom. So this is a scale from 1 to 10. It's a chart, and people answered 1 was their condition is much worse, their psychiatric condition. 5 is no change, and 10 is much better. Majority of people for every condition answered 10. Their condition's much better. And then it's kind of a scale. And then the next highest is 9, next highest is 8, 7, 6. And just very small percentage answered that it's worse. Or no,
I was going to say, it would be kind of weird to continue to take something that makes you feel worse.
Yeah, that's another, that's another of the bias. Really, anybody that would be taking this, most people that would be taking this would probably enjoy their kratom.
Or at the very least, are neutral to it, right?
Yeah.
It is interesting to see across all of the conditions, so ADHD, PTSD, depression, or anxiety, it seems to be that the amount of improvement are relatively the same. Like it seems like everybody seems to be benefiting around the same amount. The quality of life was improved to the same degree across all of those conditions.
What did they say?
What were you saying earlier about bipolar? So like to some degree, like ADHD, PTSD, anxiety, depression, they're all sort of like cognitive affective disorders, but like, not to the degree or extent of like schizophrenia or bipolar, these sort of like personality disorders. Did they say that were those people that reported those personality disorders thrown out, or they just weren't of interest?
I wonder. I mean, they might have also reported anxiety, depression. It seems like they took the 4 most common and looked at those. It differed slightly between conditions. Kratom users diagnosed with ADHD were less likely to report sleep improvement and decreased pain, whereas PTSD or anxiety criteria were more likely to report decreased pain and experience an elevated mood, euphoria, or high. PTSD also more commonly had sleep improvement, sexual enhancement, and increased focus. Among respondents reporting depression and anxiety, reducing or stopping other substance use, experience an increase in empathy were more likely to be reported.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense for the PTSD because I think there's a lot of PTSD just does a lot, and if it calms down and then it'll help you sleep more if you're not kind of gripped by panic attacks and stuff like that. It seems to make sense given the conditions. And the other thing that I pointed out in the article is the concomitant use of other substances. Cannabis was the highest co-use substance, and then CBD, followed by CBD and benzodiazepines. And there's just like a small percentage that used amphetamine, and opioids, a very small percentage.
That's just sort of a reflection of the demographics too. I mean, cannabis is the most widely consumed, right? So you would expect that to be the highest co-use.
Negative experiences, so nausea,
upset stomach, irritability or agitation, that was significantly different. Shortness of breath, dry mouth, problems urinating, anger, hostility, or aggression. I was just reading the ones that were statistically significant.
Nausea, I found nausea, constipation, stomach upset, and dizziness or drowsiness. Those are all above 9% of the people responded that they got that. They broke it down by conditions. So nausea, 29% was the most people reported nausea. So that was the most commonly reported. Constipation, I mean, I hear that a lot. Constipation was 19 to 28%. So nobody reported death. So that's an inherent bias because dead people can't take the survey.
No,
I wonder though if they had like dependency and addiction on the survey because I don't see that there.
Yeah, it would have to be a like these were all properly diagnosed and confirmed cases, right? That was part of the selection criteria. I wonder if they even asked about like a history of addiction.
Yeah, some reports indicate that regular kratom use at a higher doses can cause dependence. They referred to another article that said that, and they mentioned it, but it doesn't look like they asked that. I mean, well, they did ask whether they took methadone to treat dependence, and they said there was, like, former opioid users.
Given that we know who the authors are, too, like, they're very acutely aware of the stigmatization there, and so maybe that was like a conscious choice to not include that or not focus on that, because usually like that's what makes the headlines, stuff like that.
And I guess, did you increase your kratom use over time could get an indication of who might have a dependence? I mean, I assume that people who are taking daily have some kind of physical dependency that might just be as mild as a coffee dependency or stronger. Yeah, they didn't focus on that, which was interesting.
So is there anything that they found or they reported that like caught you off guard or by surprise? You think just sort of update, with a larger sample size and confirming sort of current theories?
Yeah, because it seems like going back to, there's a John Hopkins, it goes around a lot. It's a chart with a leaf. They found the same demographics, like middle-aged, white, middle class. I think the Johns Hopkins survey found mostly female, though. That was from 2019. But yeah, I mean, it seems to correlate with all the other surveys and conclusions. But this one seems a little more detailed, I think. They're accounting for what people were using it for, and I think Kirsten Smith is doing a lot of work towards that. She's actually writing some case reports that are, she said, like 4,500 words. They're like way more detailed than the ones that have been put out so far by somebody that showed up at the emergency room with kratom and a doctor, and we looked at some of these, like kratom-induced psychosis. Meanwhile, the guy stopped all his meds for a week. So she's looking at...
hadn't slept in 2 days. I remember that now.
Yeah. So she even said on Twitter that she's writing like some case reports that are accounting for, why people consume kratom, which is kind of what this was. It wasn't just a survey, do you use kratom? well, how old are you? Where are you from? Are you employed or college educated? It's that plus all these other things. So I think the surveys are getting more detailed. And when the one comes out where they had people use the app and everything, kind of beyond a survey, she called it a real world clinical assessment. So
longitudinal,
yeah. So that'll hopefully have a more detailed picture of who and why people are using Kratom, who's using Kratom, and why they're using it. That's a better way to put that.
That is and it's contrary to the baseline assumption of law enforcement and drug abuse professionals that just assume the worst from the beginning, right? We sort of need to collect this data to say, like, that's not really the case.
Yeah, Mississippi really needs to read this stuff because that's they got a ban bill there. There's a couple of states with ban bills like South Carolina, West Virginia, but they also have Consumer Protection Act bills. But Mississippi is really going nuts. I just interviewed a lady from Mississippi that I put on the podcast today, and she's originally from New York City, but she's like, I'm moving back to New York because it's going crazy down here. They're going to ban Kratom,
Is this recent? Like, I knew that there was maybe some counties in Mississippi that were like that, but the whole state's considering it now?
Oh, yeah. Well, every year they have a state ban bill and it doesn't get through, but they have another one this year. And what they're going to try to do is give the head of the Department of Health, I don't know exactly it's called, the power to say what can and can't be sold over the counter. So if he could just say, Kratom's not sold over the counter, and he wouldn't have to go through their Congress, which is...
I wonder what the motivation is behind that. And is it specific just to Kratom, or it's giving them just such wide breadth of power?
The particular bill that's going now is Kratom and tianeptine. They're grouping those together because there's not like a tianeptine community there that's like, oh yeah, this really helps. And I think mostly people use. I don't really know. I think it is a painkiller, but it's way more. There's way more risk involved in that, but they're lumping it on the Kratom bill. And it's like the police have been the ones lobbying from county to county to get it outlawed. Somebody I interviewed from Mississippi said she thinks it's might be the cannabis lobby, but I think the police are kind of like, they have medical cannabis now, so they're not going to be able to bust people for weed, so they want something to replace it, because the police really have been lobbying in Mississippi, Louisiana. And then the other thing is the rehabs. They want it to be illegal. There's this one called Lifehouse in Louisiana, one state over, and they even had their members, people that are in recovery there, show up at one of these parish board meetings and say, oh, you got to outlaw Kratom and stuff. It's just kind of like a weird...
So our boss can make more money.
Yes. So you can have court-ordered clients for... exactly. This guy here.
Pay for it.
Well, they get people. They work with their probation officers and everything, so they get people directly from jail with drug problems.
So imagine that, hiding under the veil of empathy. If you were to see groups lobbying against cannabis in West Virginia or Virginia, given that state's historical reliance and output of tobacco, that sort of makes sense. But I still haven't found the connection to why Mississippi, maybe because of incarceration laws. And I know that down in the South, I think are generally the highest rates of incarceration, but
yeah, especially the deep South, I think.
Yeah. Is that Lighthouse? Is their headquarters in
they're Louisiana, but there's other rehabs in Mississippi that are you see it on Facebook, because some people start commenting, and some lady writes this big thing about Kratom. It turns out, she's works at this rehab. So they're all the rehabilitation people are pushing for it. So that's one of the lobbies. And then the police, it was the Lowndes County Crime and Addiction Task Force. That's the first thing I wrote about in Mississippi. They were going around. It was former cops or current cops and former state DEA agents or whatever the state DEA is called, going around and just talking to cops. Oh, this stuff's killing people. It's just as bad as heroin and whatnot.
Right. It's in both instances, none of them will like explicitly admit the conflict of interest that it also affects their revenue streams.
Yeah.
You know, it's I ran into that same thing in Ohio. I think we had mentioned it before, but where when we were trying to get opiate addiction or dependence added as a qualifying condition, it was the word of one medical doctor who operates a like a recovery center that the legislators listen to, rather than like the list of 100 physicians with the same qualifications saying that this is not true.
Yeah, that happened in Arkansas too. There was one guy that was a doctor that said, kratom's addictive, and that's how it became illegal in Arkansas. It's just like overnight bill. They had a public comment period. They like announced it the same day they had it. It was like one of those things. Nobody showed up in favor, and then the one doctor wrote them an email, and then that was it. It was illegal.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's wild. It's like, it's a dirty game sometimes. Like when they have like public notice requirements, so they get a ad out in a paper that no one reads in a font size 8. Like, oh, well, no one really cares about it, so we're just going to move forward with whatever the people that we do pay attention to are telling us to do.
Yeah,
it's unfortunate,
and it's crazy because Kratom even has lobbyists, and it's still a challenge because they got the whole anti-drug industry kind of against it.
What was that thing you were mentioning? 2CT? I've never even heard of that. Whatever they're trying to include in the bill in Mississippi. So Kratom.
Tianeptine.
What's that?
See, Tianeptine is like, I think it's a synthetic drug. I haven't really studied on it.
How do I spell it?
Tianeptine.
Tianeptine linked to serious harm and overdoses. It's a antidepressant, anti-cyclic antidepressant. Interesting. Oh, it is an opiate receptor agonist. Okay.
Yeah. And there's been a couple instances where they found that Kratom was adulterated with tianeptine, which they also don't check for it on. I don't think they check for it on toxicology reports. So it might be one of the things that contributed to some of the deaths, but I'm not sure. It's only a couple times I think they found it in Kratom adulterated, but then it's not tested very much.
But it's a prescription though, so where are people even buying this?
Yeah.
I mean, it says it's interesting legal status. In general, it's prescription only, but in the U.S., it's not FDA approved. Schedule 1 in Minnesota, Schedule 2 in Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama, and AU, or that's Australia. So yeah, there's only 4 states that have it scheduled, and it's in Schedule 1 or Schedule 2.
It looks like you can buy it online. I'm looking at it right here.
Well, I mean, there's tons of those sites. Like you go to a Canadian pharmacy, and it looks like you can buy prescription drugs online, but I don't know. I've just never actually even tried or any of those things.
But that's
interesting. I wonder if it's like having to come back, and that like doctors are trying to transition people off of opiates, really no matter what, just like as a matter of principle because of the issue. So like, I wonder if tianeptine was a way that they could continue to prescribe it to patients who needed it, but it was under the radar of the drug monitoring systems. And now it got to the point where like it showed up on their radar, and so now they want to block it as well. Maybe.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's kind of being lumped in with Kratom in Mississippi.
Two completely unrelated. One's a natural supplement of plant material. The other one's a pharmaceutical drug. Again, the apples and oranges being put in the same basket. Classic.
Yeah. Yep. But we'll see what happens. Well, it looks like those 2 state ban bills in Mississippi died in committee on January 31st. Kratom will not be banned statewide in Mississippi in 2023. We're keeping you up to date on KratomScience.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, share, comment. Especially share this on social media. Check us out on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook. Check out Dr. Jon Cachat at @JCachat. The music is Captain Big Wheel. The song is called Moonrunner. Kratom Science Journal Club is produced by me, Brian Gallagher, for KratomScience.com. Take care.